militarization. And at the same time, we want to see what we can do collectively to respond to this moment. And so I think today the goal is to have a very brief conversation around the impacts to youth. And so we have some speakers on that topic. And then at the appropriate time, we'll open it up for questions. At this time, in order to facilitate a conversation around the impact of the militarization on our youth, I want to throw it to Aziza Taylor. She is in communications in the mayor's office. And so over to you, Aziza.
Thank you, Mayor Harris. Excuse me. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this community update on how the federal surge is impacting youth. As Mayor Harris mentioned, my name is Aziza, and we've gathered a diverse group of leaders and advocates to shed light on how the federal surge is impacting the emotional health, sense of safety, and the daily lives of young people across Shelby County. Our first guest is Dr. Karen Streeter. She is a licensed school psychologist, mental health consultant, and author with more than 30 years of experience. She is also the founder of Streeter and Do Associates, where she helps strengthen schools and youth organizations across Tennessee through psychological and behavioral support. Dr. Streeter, thank you for being with us today. And we would actually just love to begin with your reflections in about 2 minutes, if possible, on how the current federal surge is impacting youth mental health and what families should do and keep in mind during this time. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Aziza and Mayor Harris. Thank you so much for having this forum. In the work that I do every day, I'm recognizing that our children are in trouble. About once a month, I work with a large group of kids just to do a mental health check-in. And normally I will ask them, how have you been feeling over the last 2 weeks on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being the worst you've ever felt and 10 being the best you've ever felt. And normally they're very lighthearted and they'll say, oh, I'm a 9, a 10, 11, or 12. But 2 weeks ago, I noticed a severe change. They gave me ones, twos. The highest of it was a 6. And I asked, why is this? And they said, I don't know. Weird things are happening. I'm not sure why I feel this way, but everybody's acting strange. And we know that children are masters of nonverbal communication. They look at body language, they understand environments and tones. And so that's what we're giving off, and they are feeling it. It is affecting them every single day. And we know that studies show that looking at trauma, or having adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, the more you have of those, the more likely you are to have negative consequences as you're going through your developmental stages. So this could be things like problems focusing, academic achievement is now impaired, maybe some cognitive impairment, emotional problems, behavioral issues. So these are things that we really want to look at. And so what I've done is I've created a pamphlet based off of my book, Dr. K's 5Ks of Being Okay. This is a free pamphlet available for download for parents in stressful times. And it goes over my 5Ks. Like it says to keep talking like we're doing today, making sure that you're having open communication with your children. Keep thanking, because thanking grounds you into the here and the now and helps get rid of anxiety. Keep forgiving. We know that forgiveness is going to be epic in this situation in order to get us through all of this. Then you have to keep planning. That is so important. So what I did was I created an actual safety plan for the back of that pamphlet so that parents who haven't already done that, they'll actually have a list of people who are safe, places to go, maybe some legal aid they can consider if something strange happens, like the parents are detained or even the kids are detained. So I hope that will be helpful. And I hope this starts off our conversation in the right direction, which would be towards solutions as well as figuring out exactly what the problems are. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Streeter. And I wanted to ask just a quick follow-up question to see if you could give some
Yeah.
insight and perspective around maybe some of the long-term and short-term impacts that could
Mhm.
occur when youth are facing law enforcement or the militarization of law enforcement.
Yes. So, and I've actually done research on how trauma and these adverse childhood experiences affect children in the short term as well as in the long term. So, in the short term, you may see things like increased anxiety, which is lots of worry. There may even be some school phobia. They may even have some behavioral problems like being more aggressive or being very timid. They may not be able to focus in school. So you may see a decrease in their academic achievement. At home, they may show anger, things of that nature. And then as they become adults, if you continue in this vein with having trauma over and over again, constant adverse childhood experiences as adults, these children are more likely to become incarcerated because they're not receiving the services that they need oftentimes. So they will have this decreased academic achievement, increase in behavioral problems. And so we know that children who have that combination tend to grow up to be adults who end up breaking laws, having problems following the rules. And so then we come back to where we are today, which is having people who have to interact with law enforcement in order to become incarcerated. So it's very, very important that we address this situation now before we have a generation of children who are traumatized and they really are not functioning well when they go into adulthood.
Thank you, Dr. Streeter, for that insight and perspective. So our next speaker, and I'm pleased to introduce Sarah Babb. She's the Deputy Director for the Refugee Empowerment Program. She has been there and served with the Refugee Empowerment Program for over 20 years, and she continues through her leadership and others there to make REP, a place of belonging for communities coming from refugee encampments, documented and undocumented families. So, Sarah, thank you for joining us, and I would love for you to share your perspective as well on how this current climate is impacting the work at REP and the families and clients that you serve.
Thank you so much, Aziza. I want to start by mentioning that Refugee Empowerment Program is an ethnic community-based organization, which means that the majority of our board of directors are of refugee origin. So while I have the privilege to talk to you today as a white American, I'm not the typical representation of what our staff or team necessarily looks like. And you'll be fortunate later to hear from the son of our founder, Mama Ruth Lomo, Isaac Lomo. But to give that context, we are of the community voice that continues to lead us. And we've been a safe place for over 25 years for refugees and immigrants in Memphis. This new challenge is a lot. We are the first and often last line of defense for newcomers of refugee and immigrant origin. We know the language, we know the culture, we know some about their struggles and what matters to them. And we are having to shift our resources now to be more present in schools and the community so that we can protect folks, offer care and assistance, including logistical and emotional support, like countering the narrative that they're not wanted or that they're dangerous or that they're somehow less than, um, as well as logistical and emotional support or legal support. Excuse me. We're also having to offer a lot more new trainings and support for our staff. And frankly, some of this we already know well, but some of it we're learning as we go along because none of this is brand new, but this situation is new. And so we're having to be like very dynamic and have constant conversations about where we're at, what is understandings, how do we combat misinformation, how do we do know your rights, how do we address grief and trauma. I just have a few more points here. I won't take too much longer. We're also having to do more security trainings and protocols. We're fortunate at REP that we have never once had like an external hate incident happen, but we need to be very mindful. We're doing active shooter drills. We are talking with the staff about how we don't let people in. We're even considering increasing our vetting processes for volunteers. so that we can keep people safe. Because kids have to be regulated to learn. And how are children supposed to regulate when even adults are struggling to regulate? Kids come to us after they've been in school all day. And so while we do want to, make sure they keep learning with us, we want to do it in an enriching and respectful way. And often now what we're having to do is spend a lot of our time with the emotional care and needs that children have, because we're not going to try to, enforce literacy and math activities when kids are even trying to find their own basic sense of safety and purpose. Folks are even leaving, they're leaving school, they're leaving Memphis, and it's not the parents don't want to, they're just afraid because people don't even care whether you have your documentation or not. And if you don't speak English and you can't defend yourself, what are you going to do? And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Isaac Aziza. I know you might want to intro him first, but he'll be able to tell you more from the community's perspective about how they're feeling, and then also some of the ways that we're responding in terms of offering supported programs and services for young people and their families.
Thanks, Sarah. I love the partnership, collaboration. So yes, exactly. I'm passing it to you, Isaac. Isaac James is our next speaker. He works with the Center for Transforming Communities as a Binghamton neighborhood connector and resident researcher. Isaac actually came to Memphis as a child refugee, and he continues to contribute to refugee youth advocacy efforts through REP's Trauma Healing Club, Youth Advisory Council, and mentoring efforts. So Isaac, I'll turn it over to you for remarks.
Thank you for this opportunity. I'd like to first begin with a quote from a student that was sent to me from the student about what's happening. So, the federal surge has changed the way many refugee immigrant youth, including me, see America. When I first came to this country, it felt like a safe haven, somewhere I could finally breathe, learn, and grow without fear. I felt welcomed, like I could build a new life and chase my dreams, but now things feel different. I find myself constantly looking over my shoulder, being cautious about going outside. The thought of my family being taken away at any minute while doing everyday things is scary and always on my mind. It's hard to focus at school, to sleep peacefully, or to feel like everything will be okay. If you don't know much about refugee youth, it is a challenge for youth to feel integrated and feel welcome in their new spaces. They work very hard to build friendships with their classmates, understanding with their teachers, and larger welcoming with the community in which they are in. That work is one that is done over time, several years, and sometimes it's successful and sometimes it's not. What's happening in this environment is that the youth feel as if all the work that they have done is now being taken away from them. Instead of feeling comfortable being in public life, now they're afraid and now retreating into more solitude, into more fear. And so the work that RAP has done with the youth, but also their own independent work that they've done within themselves and their families, their community, right, with the federal surge, has had them feel as if they need to go inside, right, to protect themselves, to protect their families. And so because of all this, as you know, it develops mental health challenges that the youth are facing. Because they're afraid to go out or to be in public, then access to mental health providers becomes challenging. And now they don't have the support that is needed from providers to be best equipped to handle this situation. And this is new as well to many mental health providers because the militarization is something that's new to the US. And so this environment and this space is new to everyone. For refugees who themselves are new and find it hard to integrate and to communicate, right? It's hard to find spaces and environments in which you can find that support. REP has been that support over the years with a youth podcast that they started last year, in which many of the youth were able to express their emotions, their feelings, and actually feel as if they have a space in which they can participate in public life using their voice and have listeners to understand the experience in which they go through. Because of the environment, it's kind of hard to continue to utilize your voice. We know that green card holders aren't protected with free speech. We've seen evidence where green card holders who have spoken out have seen retribution. And so we are in a time in which we are walking on eggshell in terms of how do we keep these individuals feeling that they're part of public life while also realizing that them being in public life puts a target on them. it's really unfortunate what's happening. There is a need for support for refugee youth, for immigrant communities, and especially in ensuring that their voice and who they are as individuals isn't taken or stripped away from.
Thank you, Isaac. And I know one thing that comes to mind is also helping these young people feel seen and heard, in addition to making sure they're safe. So, are there any ideas or perspectives around that from your opinion?
Yeah, I think it's important to continue to do collaborative work with organizations that are working with refugees and immigrants. As I said, unless you are asking these questions to the people that are directly affected, you won't know how to proceed, right? And proceeding forward has to be from a basis of the community that is directly affected, guiding that change, guiding the way in which policies are implemented and created so that they truly are for refugees and youth that are directly impacted, right? I know it's quite easy for divisiveness to come up and to separate communities due to different challenges, but it's critical that we continue to come together and work together and realize that we truly are all in this effort, right? Everyone is impacted by the militarization in different ways and forms, and together, working collectively, that's how we can best address what's happening.
Wonderful, thank you. So our next speaker and one to close us out, so last but not least, of course, is Maddie Thomas. She is a high school student and representative of the Shelby County Youth Council District 5. Maddie is passionate about advocating for youth mental health, social justice, and ensuring that all young people, regardless of race, gender, sexuality, disability, or income, are treated with dignity and care. Maddie, thank you for being here with us. Please share from your perspective, what are you hearing from peers and about this particular federal surge and their mental health and sense of security?
Yes, thank you for having me. A lot of times when we have these conversations about youth, their voices aren't necessarily represented. So I do appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about, my generation and how this is impacting them from a peer standpoint. Because for many young people, especially in lower income Black communities like Memphis, the presence of increased law enforcement and, the National Guard represent a spike in fear and anxiety, especially since we live in an age where social media exposes us to some of the more unfortunate realities of life. And as we scroll through our feeds and we see videos of police brutality and armored vehicles, rolling down streets, we are filled with anxiety. We've We've seen an increased express and concern over hanging out with friends in public spaces or like walking home from school.
Right. Maddie, you're back on.
Yes. Sorry, I was gonna say we've seen an increased expression of concern with just doing simple things like hanging out with friends or walking home from school due to the possibility of law enforcement brutality, which is an idea that should not even cross the minds of kids that are already inundated with just the struggles of being a kid. Other youth in undocumented or Latin American spaces have shared concerns about going to school due to the increased presence of ICE, which causes increased truancy rates in communities that are already behind the literacy curve. These communities, even those that are here legally, have had to have talks with youth about how to interact with law enforcement simply because a precedent has been set that individuals can be stopped by ICE for several different reasons. And when looking at the increase in law enforcement, we see the reminders of violence and inequality that have plagued the country for decades, disproportionately affecting low income people of color, which do make up a majority of Memphis's population. Now, I understand that many members of the community are looking for additional tools for safety. But in places like Memphis, where systemic poverty and educational inequality already weigh heavily on young people, adding militarized forces just adds to the weight. And instead of bringing in short-term solutions, because the National Guard can't be here forever, we should focus on more long-term ones, such as investing in schools, counselors, and community programs that focus on healing instead of militarization, like Dr. Karen mentioned earlier. Thank you.
Thank you, Maddie. That was awesome. And one thing I would like to follow up is What can adults, especially educators and mentors, actually do to better support youth in accessing those rights and resources that you spoke about?
I think just an increase in conversations with youth about their mental health and more long-term checkups on people rather than just in crisis management, trying to deal with the most extreme cases. Because we do see with counselors in public schools, they have so many students that they tend to only be able to focus on the ones that are in extreme crises rather than an entire student body and making sure that those who aren't showing such extreme signs are still okay because anxiety and depression come in many different forms and many different levels. And so just making sure that everyone is getting the help that they need.
Thank you so much. Thank you to each of our speakers, Dr. Streeter, Sarah, Isaac, and Madison, or Maddie, for your powerful insights, as well as Mayor Harris and continued commitment to our youth. Today's discussion really reminds us that while fear and uncertainty can shape our environment, our collective response, rooted in care, connection, and compassion, shapes our future. At this time, I'd like to turn it back over to Kelly.
Thank you. So, Bill Dries from the Daily Memphian, you can ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're pretty low. Can you talk louder?
If the reaction to the militarization is anticipation of it versus encounters with the surge. I guess I'll address this to Isaac James.
So can you repeat your question real quick, Mr. Bill? I apologize about that.
No, I'm sorry, it's my voice. How much of the reaction that you see to the militarization is anticipation of it versus encounters with the surge?
Yeah, and I guess I'll ask Sarah to kind of chime in as well, as she also works with refugee and immigrant youth. Um, I think that for refugee populations, it has been encountering with like ICE, for example, right? And so it is the anticipation, but also the actual encountering that has impacted the youth in which we have within our programming. And so we both have to learn how to offer trainings that is tailored towards the encountering, but also any fears around the anticipation. Sarah, do you want to add anything to that?
I don't think so. Most of it is anticipation. I don't even know if we know exactly where these forces have gone. I know they announced themselves, I believe, in Bartlett or somewhere nearby. So I'm not sure where they are. And I think that the population we serve is primarily immigrants. We serve people from Central and South America as well. And so I think that it seems like our participants, particularly from Sub-Saharan Africa, are getting more like swept up when ICE is around rather than actively being targeted. But the point seems to be to well, I won't speculate there. But I think that the Hispanic and Latino population is facing a little bit more pressure there and more in hiding, but it's across the board for anyone of the global majority. And there's particular fears also about like raids in places like schools. So we're showing up at a lot of the schools and spending more time in case that happens. And then also one of the fears is people driving. We have a lot of drivers also who do that for work in our community, and there's so many roadblocks and things like that that there's also fears and stories, not our participants exactly, but people they know who are taken off the road, and then we sometimes we don't even know where they are. Their families don't know where they are yet, and that's even scarier almost to be taken when you're not even in your own community.
May I add a little bit to that if it's okay?
Please.
Okay. So for when it comes to traumatizing people or children or adverse childhood events, it does not have to happen to them specifically. They can just witness it or know about it, and it still has the same traumatizing effect. So, knowing that it's happening to other people, kind of being in the environment, can really impact them. The children I work with are not immigrants, but yet they're still feeling a high level of anxiety.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you to all our attendees. Mayor Harris, if you would like some final words, and then we'll close out. Thanks again.
Oh, very good. Well, thanks to all the speakers and thanks to Aziza for facilitating. Thanks to those who are bearing witness to this. We know that lots of different parts of our community are being impacted by the militarization that we've seen. So we're, as I said at the top, we're in unprecedented times. So it's the threat of militarization in our communities, but also the impact, most of which is negative in terms of our schools and the anxiety from school officials and school leaders and youth and families. And at the same time, during our commute. And so I think you've heard some conversation around that. As we get back and forth to school and back and forth to our communities, how does that commute feel, and is that commute a safe one? And so we got to do everything we can to wrap our arms around this problem and raise up youth voices and youth impact. And so this is a start, but this is certainly not the end of that conversation. I certainly intend to get with school officials and see if we can get a meeting with ICE to make sure that we have a conversation around where the protected zones are, if any. I've heard a lot of stories and a lot of folks who are demanding some level of protected zones for kids and families and protection against the worst atrocities, which will be things like family separation. And so we're going to be trying to get in touch with ICE over the next couple days and see if we can pull together a conversation between ICE and school officials around protected zones. At the same time, as you may know or don't know, I'm not sure, we're going to talk about impacts on the faith community. And so that will be Thursday at 1:30. And so that conversation needs to be had publicly because there are so many faith organizations in town that have had to change operations because of the militarization that we've seen or the threat of militarization. So that'll take place Thursday at 1:30. And finally, just to report out the latest news from the lawsuit. We are pleased that the state's effort to delay the lawsuit, delay the hearing, was rejected, and that we were successful in arguing against the state's request to delay. And so that first hearing will go on as scheduled, and we're grateful that we were able to defeat the state in their request to delay. That's all I've got. Thanks, all of you, for joining, and hopefully I will see you all at Thursday. Thanks very much. See you.
Thanks, everyone.